I was lying in that hospital bed when my life split in two. Tubes ran through my arms, monitors hummed by my side, and every breath felt like it was being borrowed. I had been there for weeks already, fighting an illness that nearly broke me, clinging to hope that my family, my wife of 4 decades and the children we raised, were standing in my corner. Then my phone buzzed, a simple vibration against the tray beside me. Something so ordinary, yet what I read shifted everything. It was a text from Marcia. No greeting, no compassion, no ounce of the tenderness we once shared. Just words typed coldly, as if she'd rehearsed them 100 times. I want a divorce. I remember staring at the screen, the room so quiet that I could hear the tick of the wall clock across from my bed. I had lived long enough to know that when people decide to betray you, they never choose a dramatic storm. They send it in plain text. They deliver it like bad mail, short, careless, without ceremony. My hands were trembling, not from the sickness this time, but from the truth crashing down on me. The woman I built a home with, the mother of my children, was abandoning me while I was fighting to breathe. I did not shout. I did not curse. I did not let the weight of betrayal pull me under. I simply typed back one word. Noted. I pressed send, set the phone down, and closed my eyes. Calmness is the kind of weapon that cuts deeper than rage. And in that moment, I knew my silence would speak louder than any argument. My name is Vernon Calhoun, and this is my true life story straight out of Richmond, Virginia. Let me know where you are watching from, because it is my joy that my story reaches as many people that can learn a lesson or two from it. Let's continue, my friend. I laid back against the pillow, letting the beeping machine measure each shallow breath. I placed the phone on my chest and let the one word I'd sent linger in my mind. Noted. She had no idea what it meant, no clue of the storm it carried. That was the day the betrayal turned into a battlefield, though she didn't yet know she had already lost. When I look back over my life, I see a man who gave everything to his family. I wasn't born into wealth, but I carried work in my bones. From the time I was a young man in Richmond, I understood that if you wanted respect in this world, you earned it with calloused hands and sleepless nights. I built a career that kept food on the table, clothes on my children's backs, and a roof that never leaked over our heads. I wasn't perfect, but I was present. Every graduation, every holiday, every storm, we weathered it together. Or at least I thought we did. Raising Denzel and Tanisha was the greatest pride of my life. I made sure they never felt the hunger I knew as a child, never had to walk to school in shoes that barely held together. I taught Denzel how to throw a ball, how to stand tall when the world tried to push him down. I sat with Tanisha at the kitchen table, going over math problems until her little frown turned into a smile. I didn't just provide, I poured my life into them. I believed that's what a father was meant to do. And Marcia, my wife, she had once been my partner in that mission. In the early years, she stood beside me, at least enough to make me believe we shared the same dream. We were young, and I thought her laughter was the sound of forever. I worked double shifts while she kept the home, and when I finally had the chance to bring her comforts, new furniture, vacations, gifts, I did it gladly. I wanted her to feel secure, to know she was loved. But somewhere along the way, that gratitude turned into entitlement. The woman who once said, "We'll make it together," became the one who believed she was owed more than I could ever give. It showed in small ways at first. A complaint about what I wore to church. A sigh when I came home too tired to entertain company. Later it grew louder. Demands for more. Resentment when I chose responsibility over recklessness. She began spending money like it grew on trees, dragging me into arguments about things we didn't need, but she couldn't live without. I carried those burdens quietly because I thought marriage meant enduring even the sharp edges. But selfishness has a way of spreading like fire. While I built a life of loyalty, she slowly built a life of dissatisfaction. My devotion became her leverage. My sacrifices became invisible. Where I saw a family worth protecting, she saw a cage she wanted to escape. Still, I never stepped out on her. Not once. My vows were not conditional. Even when her friends laughed at men like me, faithful, steady, predictable, I didn't falter. I wanted to be an anchor for my children, someone they could look to and say, that's how a man should stand. I thought that would be enough to keep my household strong. But lying in that hospital, I realized the truth. No matter how much you give, some people will always want more. I had poured decades of love, protection, and hard work into a marriage that now meant nothing to her. She didn't see me as the man who stayed, who sacrificed, who never strayed. She saw me as weak, as disposable. And maybe that's the cruelest part of betrayal. It's not that the enemy didn't value your loyalty. It's that they never believed it mattered in the first place. If there was ever a fracture in my house that never healed, it was the day Denzel walked in on his mother doing what no child should ever see. He was only a teenager then, still living under our roof, when he stumbled onto a scene with Marcia and a man who had no business in my home. Not just any man either, it was someone from our church, a man I had welcomed as a brother in faith. That sight carved something deep into my boy's heart, and it carved something just as deep into our marriage. Denzel didn't know what to do with the weight of that secret. He carried it for a few days before finally coming to me, his voice shaking, his eyes wide with confusion and pain. I still remember the way he said, "Dad, I don't want to hurt you, but you need to know." He thought he was protecting me, doing right by the father he trusted. And in truth, he was. He gave me the gift of truth, even when it broke him to deliver it. But Marcia never forgave him for it. From that day forward, she treated her own son like he was an enemy. To her, Denzel wasn't her child anymore. He was the one who exposed her betrayal. She turned cold, withholding affection, finding reasons to criticize him for things she overlooked in Tanisha. She whispered to me that he was rebellious, that he was disrespectful, when the only thing he had done was tell the truth. It didn't stop there. She poisoned the air between him and his sister. She'd pull Tanisha aside and say, "Don't be like your brother. He doesn't respect me." Over time, the bond between them thinned. I watched my children, once inseparable, drift apart because their mother needed someone to carry the blame for her own choices. The household grew heavy after that. Denzel spent more time out with friends, more time away from the house that no longer felt safe. He graduated, moved on with his life, but the damage lingered. Marcia had succeeded in pushing him out, making him the estranged one, the outsider. And the sad part is, she never once looked back with regret. She was content with the distance, maybe even relieved. But Denzel never cut me off. He'd call late at night just to check in, his voice carrying the kind of concern only a son has for his father. When I was hospitalized, it was Denzel who showed up. He didn't have much, but he put his money on the table for bills, making sure I didn't lack. He stood by me, even when his own mother treated him like a stranger. That's the measure of a man right there. Not how much noise he makes when times are good, but how steady he stands when everything is falling apart. Marcia could fool herself into thinking she erased him from our lives, but I knew better. Blood doesn't disappear. A father knows when his son carries scars, and I knew Denzel carried his because of her. Every time she looked at him, she saw the boy who had told the truth. And instead of facing her shame, she turned it into hatred. I used to hope time would soften her, that maybe one day she'd pick up the phone and call him without venom in her voice. That hope died when she sent me that divorce text. In her mind, she had already erased both of us long ago. The sickness came on slow, like a shadow lengthening across the day until it swallows all the light. At first it was fatigue I couldn't shake, then chest pains that sent me to the doctor, and before long I was in a hospital bed with machines dictating my rhythm of life. 2 months I laid there, body weak, spirit tested. And in those 2 months, I saw the truth about who really stood with me. Denzel was there. My son, her outcast, my lifeline. He drove hours just to sit by my bedside. He brought me fresh clothes, made sure I ate when the nurses only left trays. When the bills came, he reached into his pocket, even when I knew it strained him. He wasn't wealthy, but he was rich in loyalty. And that meant more than gold to a man who thought he might not live to see another season. But Marcia, my wife of decades, she was a ghost. Days passed without her face in the doorway. When she did show up, it was short visits full of sighs, her eyes wandering everywhere but to me. I was fighting for my life, and she was fighting to be free of me. It's strange the things you notice when you're stuck in a hospital bed. The nurses whispered about families who never left their loved ones' sides, about wives who brought blankets from home and held their husbands' hands through the night. I didn't have that. I had silence. I had the occasional sound of her heels clicking away down the hall, already halfway out the door before she said goodbye. 2 months in that place taught me a lesson I'll never forget. When life strips you down, people show their true faces. Some will walk out and close the door behind them. Some will sit beside you, no matter how heavy the air. And in my darkest hours, it wasn't the woman who vowed to stand by me. It was the son she hated most. But nothing could have prepared me for the truth I would later learn. While I fought to survive, Marcia had moved another man into our home. Quentin Rhodes. That name alone is enough to sour my mouth. He wasn't some stranger she stumbled across in the twilight of her life. He wasn't a distant fling. He was a man who once worked under me. Years back, when he was just another young employee, I gave him an opportunity to earn honest money. I trained him, mentored him, put food in his pocket. And now, decades later, he had slithered his way into my house. Not through the front door as a guest, but through the back door as my wife's lover. He was in his early 40s, full of the arrogance that comes with age enough to know better, but not enough to act wiser. To Marcia, he was excitement. To me, he was disrespect made flesh. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the insult of bringing him into the very home I had built. The same home where pictures of our children hung on the walls, where every brick was laid with the sweat of my labor. And now, while I was wired to machines in a hospital gown, Quentin was sitting at my table, probably in the chair I used to claim as mine. Neighbors talk. Even when you think they don't, they see more than you realize. One of them let it slip to Denzel. Strange cars in the driveway, lights on late into the night, Marcia and a younger man coming and going like newlyweds. Denzel didn't want to tell me at first, worried it would break me while I was still fragile. But a son knows his father deserves the truth, even when it cuts. And when he finally told me, I felt something in me go cold. Not shock, not rage, but something deeper. A hollowing out. Quentin wasn't just disrespecting me as a man. He was violating the foundation of my family. He had been in my orbit once, a subordinate, someone who ate because of the work I gave him. For him to circle back years later and slip into my wife's bed while I was down, that wasn't just betrayal. That was mockery. And Marcia, what can I say about a woman who would let another man sleep under the roof her husband still paid for? Who would throw away decade for the thrill of stolen kisses and Laurel's poisonous encouragement? She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't even cautious. She thought I was already gone. To her, the beeping of hospital machines was a countdown to her freedom. But she underestimated me. They both did. She thought she had traded an old man for a new life. Quentin thought he had taken the place of his former boss. Neither of them knew that every move they made was setting them up for a fall. When Denzel told me the truth, I didn't rage. I didn't curse. I lay there in silence, letting the weight of it settle. Because silence is power when you know something others don't. They believed my story was ending in that hospital bed. What they didn't realize was that the next chapter had already begun, and it wouldn't end the way they thought. Looking back, I can't pretend Marcia's fall into betrayal happened overnight. Seeds of it were planted years before, watered by one woman who never left her side, Laurel Simmons. To me, Laurel was a snake dressed in fine clothes, smiling in my face while dripping poison into my wife's ear. She was the kind of friend who thrived on destruction, a woman who laughed at loyalty and mocked stability. Where I saw marriage as sacred, she saw it as a cage to be broken. From the moment Marcia and Laurel became close, the change began. Suddenly, Marcia wasn't content with family dinners or quiet nights on the porch. She wanted the excitement Laurel bragged about. Nights out, younger men chasing her, stories of passion that were nothing more than shame dressed up as freedom. Laurel would lean in during gatherings, her voice low but sharp, saying things like, "Girl, you only live once. You better enjoy it while you still got it." She mocked fidelity every chance she got. I still remember one evening, years back, when we hosted cookout. Laurel sat at our table, sipping wine, and laughed about how faithful men are just boring men too scared to live. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, daring me with her eyes. I ignored it then, but the sting never left. Because I knew her words weren't just jokes, they were lessons she was feeding to Marcia day by day. Laurel dressed betrayal in glamorous colors. She made selfishness sound like liberation. When Marcia started demanding more money, more attention, more things we didn't need, I recognized Laurel's fingerprints all over it. She'd whisper, "Don't let Vernon keep you tied down. You still got time to feel young again." Those words turned into arguments in my house, resentment in my marriage. Even the way Marcia carried herself changed. She started comparing herself to younger women, buying clothes that weren't her style, talking about how she deserved the same thrill she had when she was 20. It wasn't coming from her. It was Laurel's poison, dripping slow but steady. By the time I landed in the hospital, Laurel's influence had hardened Marcia into something unrecognizable. Instead of standing by my side, she was laughing in Laurel's kitchen, plotting how to step into a new life with Quentin. I wasn't blind to the source of it. Laurel had spent years telling her that loyalty was for fools, that chasing youth was better than keeping a good man. She was the devil on her shoulder, nodding when Marcia left me to rot, cheering when Quentin walked into my home. What makes it worse is that Laurel never paid the price for her words. She sat back, sipping her wine, while Marcia lived out the destruction. She didn't lose a husband. She didn't lose a home. She didn't tear apart her children's respect. No, that was all on Marcia. Laurel just handed her the matches and laughed while she struck them. I used to think influence was harmless, that a wife would always choose her husband's wisdom over a friend's recklessness. But I learned the hard way. Poison doesn't kill in a single dose. It drips day after day until the person you love isn't the same anymore. And by the time you notice, the venom has already claimed them. Marcia's betrayal may have been her choice, but Laurel Simmons was the one who showed her how to walk the path. And together, they believed I was too weak, too sick, too blind to see what was happening. But they were wrong. I had seen it all. I had noted it all. And every drop of poison they poured into my house would one day become the rope that tightened around them. When Marcia sent that text, she thought she was delivering the final blow. In her mind, I was nothing more than a dying old man, strapped to machines, too weak to fight back. She didn't know that I had already moved my pieces long before she made her play. The truth is, sickness teaches you something about time. When I first felt my body giving out, when the doctor started talking in hushed tones, I realized I couldn't afford to wait for fate to decide everything for me. So, one night before I was admitted for the long stay, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. My voice was thin, but my mind was sharp. I told him, it's time to prepare for every possibility. He didn't hesitate. Papers were drawn up. Accounts were reviewed. Titles were checked. Every detail of my life was put under a microscope. So while Marcia was laughing in Laurel's kitchen, sipping wine, and whispering with Quentin about the life they thought they'd build on my back, documents were being signed in quiet offices across Richmond. I gave my lawyer the authority to follow the money, to trace anything that smelled wrong. It didn't take long before the rot started showing. Transactions that didn't belong. Withdrawals I hadn't made. Attempts to move property under her name. She thought I was blind, but all she did was leave fingerprints on the crime scene. I didn't rage when I found out. I didn't send angry messages or make desperate calls. I let her play her hand fully. I wanted her to feel the thrill of thinking she had won. Let her smile in Quentin's arms. Let her believe the house, the accounts, the life we built together were all sliding into her grasp. Because what she didn't know was that every move she made was already being documented, every dollar tracked, every deed protected under my name and prepared for reversal. That's why, when her divorce text came through, I didn't bother with paragraphs or pleas, because I had already anticipated it. She was announcing her exit from a house I had already closed the doors on. They believed I was a man waiting for death. In reality, I was a man waiting for the right moment. And when the storm finally broke, neither of them would see it coming. Money leaves footprints. No matter how carefully you think you hide it, every withdrawal, every transfer, every signature tells a story. And when I put my lawyer on Marcia's trail, it didn't take long before her story came crashing into the light. The first red flag was the joint account. I had built that account with decades of sweat, overtime shifts, sacrificed weekends, and every dollar saved instead of spent on myself. That account was meant for emergencies, for security, for the family's future. But when the statements came back, the balance had bled dry in a matter of weeks. Withdrawals in cash, checks signed over, transfers to names I didn't recognize. It wasn't careful. It wasn't even subtle. It was greed in motion. Next came the property. The house in Richmond, the one Marcia and Quentin were playing house in, was still in my name. She tried to move paperwork through back channels, attempting to shift ownership without my consent. She signed documents behind closed doors, thinking a man strapped to a hospital bed couldn't possibly notice. But she underestimated two things: my foresight and the paper trail. Every one of her attempts was flagged, traced, and handed back to me in black and white. There were also smaller things that showed just how far gone she was. Luxury purchases in her name, trips billed to our accounts, gifts that weren't for me or the children. Even Laurel's fingerprints showed up, expenses tied to the nights they spent out, covered with money I earned. Marcia wasn't just living a double life. She was financing it with my hard work. Each discovery felt like a knife, but instead of cutting me down, it sharpened my resolve. I had built a reputation for discipline, for patience, for knowing when to strike. And now, with every document my lawyer slid across the desk, I felt that same discipline hardening inside me. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, plain and simple. And theft leaves consequences. My lawyer didn't rush. He built the case brick by brick, recording every transaction, notarizing every attempt at fraud. By the time we were finished, we had a fortress of evidence so strong Marcia couldn't deny it even if she tried. Her scheme wasn't a whispered rumor. It was documented fact. And when the time came, those papers would be the hammer that shattered her illusions. The irony was bitter. While she thought I was wasting away in a hospital bed, she was the one unraveling leaving a trail of her own destruction in neat little columns of numbers. And every time she swiped a card, every time she signed her name, she didn't know she was building my case. One thing I learned early in life is this: you never put all your treasures in one box. I grew up watching men lose everything because they trusted too easily. Trusted wives who weren't loyal, trusted friends who weren't honest, trusted systems that weren't built for us. So even as I built a life with Marcia, even as I handed her keys and shared accounts, I kept one thing tucked away where only I and the Lord knew it existed. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even close to the size of the house we lived in. It was a modest apartment across town, paid off quietly years ago. The kind of place most people would drive by without giving a second glance. But that little apartment represented more than bricks and walls. It was security. It was foresight. It was mine. And from the day I signed those papers, I'd already decided who it belonged to when I was gone. My son, Denzel. Marcia never knew about it. Not once did I mention it at the dinner table or during our late-night talks. She assumed every part of my world was hers to touch, hers to claim. But some things are too sacred to hand over to someone who hasn't earned them. Denzel had. Despite all the hatred his mother heaped on him, despite being pushed out of his own home, he never stopped being a son to me. He was the one who checked on me, the one who came to the hospital when she stayed away. He was the one who proved that loyalty isn't just spoken, it's lived. That apartment was my quiet way of saying, I see you, son. I honor you. And it was my shield against the chaos Marcia was creating. While she bled our accounts dry, while she brought another man under my roof, I had already locked away a piece of my legacy where her hands could never reach. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. On one side was her greed, loud, reckless, consuming everything it touched. On the other side was my foresight, quiet, steady, built not for myself, but for the one child who stood firm when the world turned upside down. Some men hide money. Some hide secrets. I hid security because I knew life can turn in an instant. I didn't predict the sickness. I didn't predict that my wife would betray me so openly. But I did know that if I left this world without protecting Denzel, I'd leave him with nothing but scars. That apartment made sure he would never be empty-handed. When I finally revealed it to my lawyer, his eyebrows rose. She doesn't know about this? He asked. I shook my head. Not a clue. He smiled then, because he understood what I had done. In a war where she thought she had taken everything, I still had a weapon she couldn't see. Marcia lived as if the house she slept in was the crown jewel of my life. She paraded Quentin through its doors, thinking she had claimed victory by owning the space I once called home. But what she never realized was that true wealth isn't always in what people can see. Sometimes it's in the things kept hidden, waiting for the right moment to shine. And when the day came that she discovered Denzel had inherited what she never even knew existed, the shock on her face would be worth more than any dollar she ever tried to steal. The house on Brookfield Drive was once my pride. But when Denzel told me Quentin had moved in, I made a decision that would cut deeper than any divorce decree. That house would not go to Marcia. It would not go to Quentin. And it would not even go to Tanisha, because by then I had seen enough of her complicity. No, that house would go to strangers. Strangers who would never know the story of what happened under its roof. Strangers who would never connect it to the man who built it. I signed it over to a charity, a foundation that provides housing for families with nowhere else to go. It was deliberate. It was brutal. And it was symbolic. The place Marcia thought she had claimed by bringing Quentin inside became a place she could never touch again. She believed she was securing her comfort. Instead, she was left with nothing but memories of the life she mocked. Of all the choices I had to make, the one that weighed heaviest on me was cutting Tanisha out. A father never dreams of disinheriting his child. You want your children to carry your legacy, to walk taller because of the foundation you built. But loyalty isn't something you inherit. It's something you prove. And when the time came, my daughter chose her mother's side. I started noticing it years ago, long before the hospital stay. Whenever tension flared in the house, Tanisha always leaned toward Marcia. At first, I thought it was just a daughter's bond with her mother, something natural I shouldn't interfere with. But it became clearer as time went on. She wasn't just bonding, she was covering. When Marcia slipped out late at night, Tanisha always had the excuses ready. Mom's just out with friends. She had errands to run. Don't worry, Dad, it's nothing. Every lie rolled off her tongue too easily. When Denzel caught Marcia in that shameful moment years back, Tanisha didn't defend him. She didn't even acknowledge his pain. Instead, she echoed her mother's words, calling him disrespectful and out of line. My own daughter, siding with betrayal over truth. It was then I realized Marcia had poisoned her too. She whispered in her ear the same way Laurel whispered in hers, training her to see loyalty as weakness and complicity as strength. During my sickness, the difference between my children became undeniable. Denzel showed up. He paid bills, asked questions, sat by my side. Tanisha? Days, sometimes weeks would pass without a call. When she did reach out, it was quick, distracted, as if she was checking a box. Her mother was busy with Quentin, and instead of holding her accountable, Tanisha covered for her. She knew Marcia wasn't visiting me, knew she was entertaining another man under my roof, and she chose silence. That silence hurt more than Marcia's betrayal. Betrayal from a spouse is one kind of pain, but indifference from your own child is another. It cuts deeper because you raised them, you taught them better, you gave them every chance to walk in truth, and still they looked the other way. When my lawyer asked about my will, I had to face it head on. Did I want to reward a daughter who had turned her back on me? Did I want to hand her the fruits of my labor after she had already proven she couldn't be trusted with the roots? The answer was clear, though it burned. No. So I made the decision. Denzel would inherit the apartment. The house went to charity. Tanisha would receive nothing. Not out of cruelty, but out of principle. I couldn't honor betrayal with inheritance. I couldn't hand my name to someone who had already traded it for convenience. I know she will hate me for it. I know Marcia will use it as one more weapon, telling her I chose favorites. But the truth is simple. I didn't choose favorites. I chose loyalty. And when it mattered most, Tanisha chose her mother. It is a painful thing for a father to admit, but sometimes love must step aside for justice. And justice meant leaving her out. For a while, I thought Quentin Rhodes was just another opportunist, but the deeper my lawyer dug, the clearer it became. Quentin wasn't just an affair. He was a predator in disguise. The first real blow came from a courthouse record out of North Carolina. Quentin had been named in a civil suit for defrauding an elderly widow out of thousands. He promised her investment opportunities, took her savings, and vanished. She never saw the money again. From there, the trail stretched further. In Tennessee, his name surfaced in connection with a romance scam. An older woman wired him money to help cover medical bills that never existed. By the time investigators caught up, he had skipped town. And then came the kicker. Quentin was already on a watch list in Georgia. Law enforcement had been tracking a string of schemes targeting women over 50, and his name appeared again and again. He used charm, fake promises, and desperation as his tools, and he left a line of broken victims behind him. So while Marcia thought she had found love, what she really welcomed into her bed was a criminal. She believed she was choosing freedom, passion, youth. What she chose was a man wanted for exploiting women who looked just like her. Women her age, women who should have been cautious, but instead fell for his rehearsed smile and smooth words. The betrayal cut deeper with that revelation. Quentin had once worked for me, stood under my guidance, taking a paycheck I provided. I had given him honest work, and he had abandoned it for a life of lies. Now, years later, he had slithered back into my life through my wife, carrying not just disrespect, but crimes that reached far beyond my family. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent decades building a name my children could be proud of. Quentin had spent decades running from his. And Marcia, blinded by greed and Laurel's whispers, hitched her wagon to a man whose past was already collapsing behind him. In the end, betrayal is one thing. Criminal exposure is another. And with Quentin, it wasn't just my dignity on the line, it was justice. The man who thought he could take my place was about to face the consequences of every scam, every lie, every woman he deceived. And when the hammer dropped, Marcia would realize too late that she had chosen not just betrayal, but ruin. The investigation had done its work. What Marcia thought she had stolen was neatly returned, protected by the law she thought would work in her favor. She walked into that courtroom smirking, certain she'd walk out with my money, my house, and my name. She walked out empty-handed. The judge looked at the evidence, at the trail she left behind, and there was no denying it. Fraud, deceit, betrayal. In a marriage where one spouse sacrifices everything and the other exploits it, the law doesn't reward the exploiter. Marcia tried to argue. She tried to cry. But tears can't erase a paper trail. And when the gavel came down, it wasn't me who was discarded. It was her. The divorce was finalized on my terms. No alimony, no share of assets, no claim to the house she thought she had secured. Everything she tried to snatch was locked away beyond her reach. The woman who thought she was finally free with her younger lover was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bad company she chose to keep. That's when the calls began. First, she called Tanisha, hoping her daughter would take her in. But Tanisha's husband wasn't having it. "She's not bringing that drama into my house," he said. And just like that, the door she expected to be open was slammed shut. Next, she turned to Laurel. For years, Laurel had filled her head with poison, convincing her to throw her marriage away. But when Marcia came knocking, Laurel didn't offer a guest room. Poisonous friends don't carry you when you fall. They step back and watch. So Marcia bounced from couch to couch, begging friends for shelter, reduced to a nomad in the very city where she once strutted like she owned the world. People whispered. Neighbors who once envied her clothes and laughter now shook their heads as they saw her dragging bags from place to place. The same pride that made her mock me, the same arrogance that made her think she could replace me, now left her humiliated in public. And Quentin? He couldn't save her. By then, the law was circling him like vultures. His scams had finally caught up with him, and soon enough, he was behind bars. Her new life disappeared as quickly as it had arrived, leaving her stranded with nothing to show but shame. For me, it wasn't about revenge in the courtroom. It wasn't about seeing her beg or hearing her cries. It was about reclaiming what was mine, securing what I had built, and walking away with dignity intact. She wanted me to be the one thrown out into the cold, the old man who died broke and forgotten. Instead, she became the one discarded, left to sleep on couches while I stood tall. When I walked out of that courtroom, the papers in my hand weren't just legal documents. They were a statement. She had tried to erase me, but in the end, I had erased her. Looking back now, I realize revenge never needed to be loud. It didn't come with fists slammed on tables or voices raised in rage. It came with patience. It came with preparation. It came with the calm understanding that some storms destroy themselves if you stand steady long enough. Marcia is gone from my life, stripped of everything she thought she'd claimed. The joint accounts, the house, the comforts she flaunted, they all slipped through her fingers, returned to their rightful place, or handed to strangers who would value them more than she ever did. She is left with nothing but the echoes of what she chose to throw away. I heard she tried staying with a friend or two, but even that wore thin. People grow tired of sheltering someone who built their life on selfishness. Now, she drifts from place to place, her pride shattered, her name carrying no weight. Quentin, the man she traded me for, sits where men like him always end up, behind bars. The scams, the fraud, the lies he wrecked finally caught up to him. He walked into my house with arrogance, believing he could steal my place, my dignity, even my legacy. But the only thing he truly claimed was a prison cell. His downfall wasn't my doing. It was his own history of lies snapping shut around him. And now, the same charm he used to fool women won't buy him an ounce of mercy where he is. As for Laurel, the so-called best friend who whispered poison into Marcia's ear for years, she has vanished into the shadows. When Marcia fell, Laurel wasn't there to catch her. That's the thing about people who thrive on destruction. They'll cheer while you set your life on fire, but they'll never stand with you when the flames consume you. Marcia gambled everything on those friendships, and when the time came, they left her with nothing but ashes. I've learned to walk again, to breathe deeper, to stand taller. I no longer measure myself by what I lost, but by what I reclaimed. My life is quieter now, simpler, but in that quiet, I found strength Marcia will never know. She thought she was leaving me to die in a hospital bed, forgotten and broken. Instead, I recovered, rebuilt, and rose without her. If you ask me what revenge truly is, I'll tell you this. It's not in shouting. It's not in fists. It's not even in getting even. Revenge is living with dignity when the people who tried to destroy you are left choking on the weight of their own choices. Marcia has nothing. Quentin has prison. Laurel has silence. And I have my son, my peace, and a legacy secured. That is justice. That is closure. That is the final word.